nice. We just got a hurricane coming into New York. It feels like that anyway. So nice to be indoors today.
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you for taking time to discuss Sleepwalker. I really do appreciate it. I really enjoyed the film.
Oh, great. Thanks.
But before I went into that, I saw something else that you were doing that actually kind of really piqued my interest, and that was that you did a reading of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for Audible. How did that come together?
I've done quite a lot of work with Audible over the years, and whenever they throw something at me, I find it very hard to say no, because I love the way that they present the work and the time that it takes and the producers that they use. And they came to me with this as a Halloween special, and I'd never read the book before, but so I was really intrigued to find out what the real story was. And the thing that really struck me about it was that it feels like medical documents from a psychologist or a doctor in its form. So there was a sort of heightened sense of reality, even though it's a fictional piece by Robert Louis Stevenson. I really, really enjoyed it. It was great. It was really interesting to sort of find a voice for that kind of medical journal style.
And that was actually exactly what I wanted to ask you about, because it is such an unusual style, the way that book's put together. So for whatever reason, there can be things that sound fine in our heads when we're reading them, but when it comes time to actually say them out loud or perform them, it can come out totally different. Was there any part of the book or any passages that stood out as particularly challenging?
It took me by surprise, because I didn't realize when I was reading it with my eyes that the very final document is actually from Dr. Jekyll himself. So it's very much a first-person account of what happened in the form of I did this and I did that. And I found that to be interesting, because you have to, from every other perspective, it's always observed, and it's obviously it contains the opinion of the person observing, whereas when it's in the first person, you really understand that the person writing this moment in time is talking about what's happening to him in real time, and that was really interesting.
And is that something where you like taking on those challenges of just looking through the stuff you've worked on in the past? You have quite a diverse career so far, and do you like the challenge of working with existing properties that people know, like in the Crucible or the Hobbit films, or even now with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or do you like to be the one that introduces the world to the character?
I like a bit of both. I mean, I've always been inspired by literature. I think it's what drew me to acting in the first place, because I was quite a bookish kid, so I was always kind of reading something, and your imagination is formed by the material you read, whether it's a very childish book or, as I got older, more sophisticated material. And actually in later life, I like nonfiction, but for some reason my brain will always sort of fictionalize or create a world in which this story exists. And so whatever medium I'm working in, whether it's an audio book or a TV show or a film, when I open the script to read it, I start to create the world in my head. And I think that's the first point of call for me, is something, whether it's something I'm interested in. I do find it hard to engage with something that I possibly wouldn't watch myself. I think, the ground has to be fertile to draw an audience in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're not invested in the story, how could you expect anyone else to be? And that's something that ties in perfectly with Sleepwalker, because it's something that right away from that opening scene, it just grabs your attention and it pulls you in. You know that this isn't going to be a passive experience watching this film. Is that how it read when you got the screenplay?
It was a really difficult read, actually. And I think, this genre and this style of filmmaking is also quite a difficult thing for an audience to receive, because it is so blurred with what's real and what's in the imagination or the dreams of the character that, people like a very singular, strong, logical narrative. And when you get into sort of the depths of the subconscious, you can get lost in it a little bit. So it was quite hard to follow the script, and I had to sort of label parts of the script. This is real, this is sleep. And then at one point I even realized that the character I was playing possibly didn't even exist. And that's a really difficult thing to wrap your head around, that you're playing somebody that doesn't exist. It's just a figment of somebody's imagination or dream. But I liked that challenge. I liked the idea of that.
Absolutely, and it's almost like a David Lynchian thing where that sort of dream logic, but taking on something like Memento, where every scene that you're watching is redefining what the film is about. And so where your character has that atypical trajectory, where it's just your relationship to the story is constantly changing. So, I mean, you mentioned that you're having to take notes on this. Is that something that you're having to sit down with the director to kind of go through scene by scene with it and know exactly where you're supposed to be?
A little bit, but I also I like to sort of just be free of my personal restraints. So I enjoyed the fact that I didn't always know where I was in the story or which part of the story it was, and I sort of threw myself into the hands of Elliot and actually Anna as well, because some days I turn up as one character and then the next day I turn up as another character, and it was nice to sort of just ride that wave with them. But it's interesting that you talk about Memento, because there were so many things that I was inspired by that sort of led me to choose this project, because I loved Memento, but another of my favorite films was a film called La Doppia Ora, which was translated as The Double Hour by Giuseppe Capotondi. It's a similar idea of the internal workings of a mind of somebody that's possibly in a coma, and you don't know what's real and what's not. And other psychological drama like I think it's Hitchcock, but it's a 1938 film called The Lady Vanishes, and I've got a feeling it's Hitchcock, but I'm not exactly sure.
Hitchcock, it is. Yep.
It is, but it's just this idea of a reality which changes, and as an audience, we start with the character, so we know what their reality is, and then when someone's trying to convince them that something is not true, I mean, it couldn't be more topical for the time that we're in at the moment, where we know the truth, and then we're trying to be persuaded that the opposite is true. It's incredibly frustrating, but in terms of drama, I think it's a really interesting thing to play with.
I hadn't even considered that part of it. My God, that because I honestly, these types of films that go into the subconscious and sort of dream logic, those have always been ones that I've been attracted to, where it's not all given to me on the first viewing necessarily, where I think I could probably explain the film or understand it in a very simple one-sentence explanation, but then they're so much deeper and so much richer that you can go back to them time and time again, and it's usually something where they tend to divide audiences down the middle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and something like Lost Highway is something that I think a lot of people just flat out hate, but that's one that I don't even know that I understand it, but I go back to it every couple of years because I feel like I need to just take another stab at it.
Oh, that's a new one to me. I'll have to check that one out. But I know I agree with you, and I think you have to be really, really careful with the audience, because I think the worst type of drama is they used to do it a lot in soap opera, where they'd want to get rid of a character, so a character would wake up from a dream and everything had been a dream, and then they could carry on with what was real, and it was a way of dispensing with all of the story. But it's so, I mean, it actually happened to me in a drama that I did in the UK called Spooks, which the character turned out not to be the person that he said he was. But then, of course, all of the history that you've put in place from before suddenly becomes false and irrelevant. And I think you have to be really careful that you don't betray an audience by making it too obscure. And, one of the risks with Sleepwalker is that, still allowing the audience to follow and to sort of not cheat them out of the explanation at the end. And hopefully we did that.
Yeah, I think you, without ruining it, to getting into anything overly specific with it, I think it walks the audience enough to it where they're satisfied by it. I can just use my wife as an example, because she really does hate ambiguity in film. It's something that I'm actually very attracted to, and she enjoyed the film. So I think that if we're both satisfied, you definitely got the balance.
Well, that's great. And the thing is, one of the mantra that I have as an actor and a storyteller is that I always put in place everything that's real and everything that exists, but you don't necessarily have to show everything or know everything. It's often useful that the character doesn't know a lot of the story, and that the audience doesn't see a lot of the story or a lot of the happenings in the piece. It's as if the whole thing exists, but we only shine a light on portions of it, so you just get glimpses of something. And I think, in the same way that music and art can also do the same thing, that at certain moments different themes come forward and the others remain in the shadows. I really I think that adds a really kind of rich texture to whatever piece you're working on, and this genre in particular was very much in that vein. And I remember Elliot referencing a kind of film noir, especially towards the end of the movie when this thunderstorm happens. And I really love, I've always said I'm an actor that I love working in the shadows and just kind of stepping into the light occasionally. And it really suited my personal taste.
And I think that actually works in a literal sense, but as the figurative aspect of that, yeah, you do need to just, if your film is nothing but exposition and you're laying that out the entire time, it can be very boring and frustrating to watch, actually. I think that's more frustrating to have my hand held through a story as opposed to being left on my own to figure it out. And I'm just wondering, as far as the sort of the world building that you do with the character, is that something that you try to do that on your own, or is that something you expect to work through with the writer-director?
It depends on the taste of the writer-director. With Elliot, he was really into detail, so we both created a sort of playlist of music in tandem with each other, and so I listened to a lot of Mica Levi and Max Richter, all kinds of different textures of sound. But he also was really interested in smell as well for the other actors. So he said, go find a kind of fragrance or a smell that one character will wear, and then on the days when you're playing another character, don't wear it, so that you can offer the other actor a sort of almost like a sense memory that you're programming the other actor with, which I've never done that before, and I think it was really interesting to play with it.
That's so brilliant.
Very subliminal.
Because if you think about it in your own personal lives, there's certain smells that you have that can be so evocative and so powerful, and they can instantly pull you back. I can think of, bread cooking fresh in my mom's kitchen when I was a kid and those kinds of things. And if I get whiffs of that, it just takes me back emotionally to that place. Yeah, I mean, and it's the same with taste. I mean, I studied Proust in drama school, and the essence of his story is all about the triggering of memory. And of course, this piece is about dream and memory. And all of that recall comes from smell, taste, and sound. So music, a fragrance on the body of somebody, or the tea that you're tasting, it's all connected to our deep subconscious. And you as a person, you'll just get hit with a sudden wave of memory that's triggered by something. You don't always know what it is. It can somebody that just walks past you and you smell them. But it was really interesting to just offer that to Anna. So for the days in the hospital bed when she was waking up, that character would smell different to the guy that she was in a relationship with. So it was interesting. And can you talk a little bit more about your working relationship with her? How was it to sort of find these characters together? Because your relationship is definitely one of the more complex ones, I would imagine, that you've had to take on. We had such a good time working together. And actually, all of my work was with her, whereas she worked with lots of other members of the cast. But I actually felt very protective towards her, because I could see, it was quite a fragile character, and she was leading the movie, so I could sense that there was a weight on her shoulders. So, I guess I fell in line with Dr. Scott, and that I started to feel, kind of paternal towards her. And then, of course, they're in a relationship together, and I didn't want her to get hurt. So both of those things kind of moved between actor and character. But we sort of stayed in contact. And then, later on last year, she was doing a musical off Broadway, and I kind of went to see her. And then I ended up playing in the same space that she was in a play that came in directly after. So she came to see me. And so it was really interesting how just a little thread of our relationship from the film kind of moved into real life. And, I'm somebody that I really wish the best for her. I sort of want to champion her as an actor. So it was really nice to find that through a film. And I mean, she's wonderful in the movie. And I mean, I think I probably first noticed her in Fruitvale Station, but she's, in going back through it, and she's been doing some really interesting work. And it's somebody that I think she could definitely become a huge name for sure. Yeah, definitely. And you know what? She's got an incredible singing voice. And I don't think she knew it until she tried to do it. And so I was like, wow, I didn't know you had that voice. And she said, neither did I. So, she's adventurous and really quite daring. That was what she did in the film was really brave and daring in places. And are you a musical theater guy?
I used to be, yeah, many years ago. It's how I found my way into theatre, and I realised I was kind of on the wrong track, so I went back to drama school and retrained in classical theatre. And I touch on it occasionally, and I enjoy certain aspects of musical theatre, but I think I'd rather watch someone else do it than do it myself.
And is there something from that, because that's the skill set that you're working with is so much different from dramatic acting and then taking that to television or film? Those are completely different skill sets as well. I mean, they have some fundamental things that are consistent, but the actual, I think possibly the more tactile side of things is different in those. Are there things that you have taken from that into the theater into television or film?
I guess not bumping into the furniture is one of them, which is sort of an inside actor's joke. But it really made me realize that and I still feel this, I'm just not much of a showman or a performer. I think I could probably enact the role of a showman or a performer as a character, but my personality is not that type of actor. And I realized that when I started working at a different psychological level, and we did something in drama school called a private moment exercise, and I also used it when I did The Crucible in London. And it's really about doing something very personal and repetitive that people observe you doing. And I realized that that's where my heart lays in terms of drama. I'd rather be observed rather than push or show something to an audience in a kind of virtuoso way. So that's the difference for me in terms of style. I think, and as a person, as an audience member, I'd rather observe somebody doing something than have something sort of thrown at me.
And is that something where do you feel protected of your personal life and sort of who your personal identity is? Because, acting can be very vulnerable, but if you're distancing yourself from the character in that way, is that something where you keep that arm's length distance?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, you always bring bits of yourself to the roles that you're playing, and then sometimes bits of the role that you're playing kind of enter your own life. So I find myself now, like, if I've played a character which has a very visual kind of identity, that for a few weeks after, I'll still keep dressing like that character, and I can't shake it off because I've sort of fallen in love with those traits. Even with something like Red Dragon, that I played in Hannibal, there was a glimmer of a moment where I actually considered getting that full body tattoo. I just found it fascinating, and I loved having this kind of artwork on my back, but I was advised against it for various reasons. But there was a moment where I probably could have gone through with it. But yeah, you sort of pick these things up, and it's one of the things I really enjoy about the work that I do is that the preparation is about laying all of the foundation work and almost tailoring the garment, and then you get inside of it and you wear it for a while, and then it starts to really fit you and feel comfortable to the point where you feel like you're not acting anymore, but then getting rid of it afterwards can take a little bit of time. But
was there anything that you took from Dr. White into your sort of personal life afterwards?
That's a good question. I guess the sense of study was interesting in him. And actually, I've played a doctor once before in a much more kind of immediate medical drama. And I really enjoyed sort of watching the size of your scene partner's pupils change shape during the scene. So this idea of someone that's studying another person, I think that really reflects me as a person more than any other character. That I think I am somebody that studies and waits and watches and listens before pitching in with my opinion. In fact, I can sometimes wait for far too long, to my own detriment. It's very fashionable now to pitch in first with your ideas, but I think I probably brought that to the character and took it away with me, this sense of observation.
And this film is one of those ones that I have a tough time with because I want everybody to go out and see it, but I know clearly this isn't a film that's going to necessarily work for everybody, but I want everybody to see it because I think it'll probably work for more people than might give it a chance. Who do you think this film should be? Who do you think should be seeing this?
Gosh, that's a good question. I would probably say anyone that's interested in the subconscious. So, and that probably is most people. I think anyone that's ever had or has very, very vivid dreams, and almost some people remember them, some people don't. But that sense of frustration when you literally wake up from a dream and you're already forgetting it, and you try to remember the immediacy of it, and it just disappears from us. So, anyone that's interested in that, I think as somebody that trades in imagination, and I crave those moments where I read a book and I'm transported just for that period where you're reading one chapter where the rest of reality falls away. If you have that ability, because some people don't, and I think people are losing the ability to completely disappear from the world for a second. Whether you can be sitting on a tube train reading a book and you can just forget where you are for a second. Anyone that's interested in that, I think this film will appeal to them, because you're going to lose yourself a little bit in the maze that Elliot Lester created.
You actually touched on something earlier that resonated with me that I think ties back into that last part where you said, as you've grown older, you read more nonfiction, and that seems to be where you end up spending your headspace more. And I have to force myself to read fiction at this point because I'm automatically drawn to, I just kind of feel like when I'm sitting down to read a book, I don't get to do it nearly as often as I would like. I need to, kind of work out a little bit while I'm doing it. I need to make myself a better person through doing it. And I think I've lost some of that just losing myself in something. And I think we need to get back to that more as adults and sort of realign ourselves with our imaginations.
Yeah, and also, there's always this need to, read what's the latest thing and what everyone else is reading. But, sometimes it's nice to go back and reread a book that you've read before, sometimes many times before, because you re-enter the world that you've already created, and you know all the doors and exits, and that's how I felt about Tolkien when I went to work on The Hobbit. I knew that book so well. I'd read it in school. I'd read it as a child. I revisited it as a 40-year-old, and it was like walking around rooms that I was very familiar with, but I just felt different about them because I was so much older. And I think that's also something that's not to be sniffed at.
No, of course not. And that has to be one of those sort of surreal moments. I don't know if that's one of those kind of like pinching yourself things of your career when you're, waking up and you're seeing your name on the call sheet and, it's next to a character that you've been familiar with for probably more years than you haven't been familiar with this character. So what was that like for you?
I mean, it was and continues to be a kind of marvelous flaw in the universe. I just think, how on earth did that happen? The 6'2" guy playing a dwarf, but yeah, and at the same time that I'm marveling at it, I'm sort of feeling the responsibility of it, because it was a sort of childhood character that I, admired or was fascinated by, and I'm taking the responsibility for every other reader, realizing this character into life, and I really cherish the opportunity to do that. And there are characters that I will play hopefully in the future that I've coveted for a long time, historic figures that I look at and I think, I'd really like to play you, and maybe I get to do that one day. So, I enjoy the responsibility, but I remain in awe of them.
You actually have one coming up that I think it's coming up. I don't know that if you've shot it yet or not, but you're doing Julie Delpy's next film, I believe, My Zoe. Is that correct?
I am indeed, and it's really interesting because a lot of the time I have to be talked into projects because I read them, and more often than not I don't like them, and then I have to be convinced about it, and then I absolutely fall in love with it. But with Julie's piece, I knew immediately that I wanted to do it. I loved the story so much. It was, I don't know how many drafts she made of the script, but the script was and is, it's almost perfect in the state that it's at now. And we're not even in production, but it's just a fascinating piece to me. It's a subject which I've touched on right at the beginning of my career, and I won't give it away too much, but it's science, but it's veering towards science fiction, but not in a kind of H.G. Wells kind of way, in a medical way. But it's a family drama, and it's a tragic story of a couple that are pulling each other apart in a divorce, and then something happens to their child, and then the story takes a really unusual course. But I'm really excited to work with her and Daniel Bruhl and Gemma Arterton, and she's written it. She's going to direct it, which is amazing, and she's found the money and she's producing it herself. She's like a little one-woman film industry all of her own. So I feel really privileged to be going to work with her.
She's done some amazing work. She's one of those people that it's pretty much anything that she attaches her name to. I'm on board day one. So I'm excited for that project for sure.
She's got great taste, and her style of work and her style of work as an actor, I think, is fascinating. And one of the things that I talked to her about when we met over the last few months was how do you feel directing yourself? And she said, I get so engrossed in the story, I forget to put myself in the movie. I forget to film myself because I'm so fascinated with the story. And I found that really, really delightful, because clearly she has no vanity or narcissism. She's just a great storyteller. So I'm really excited about this project.
And is that something that you would see yourself doing at some point? Would you want to go into directing, and do you think you would be able to direct yourself?
I don't know whether I'd be able to direct myself. I wish I could find the intelligence to become a director. Maybe I will. Who knows? But we'll see. I mean, I think I'd have to become a writer as well at some point. But yeah.
I think you've probably at this point been around enough sets and been around enough people to, at the very least, know what not to do. And that can be a pretty good.
That's true. And
to start with.
Yes. I think I might be in danger of a kind of indulgence, because I love actors so much, and I love watching what happens between two actors. That I could just let it live on and on and on. And sometimes the director has to cut. But less and less actually, because we work on digital. You can play a scene and then let it live for a couple more minutes afterwards. But I might watch them for hours and still be filming it.
That's one of the disappointing things about Robert Altman passing when he did. It seems like he would have been the type of director that would have just absolutely flourished in the digital age, just with being able to. He seemed like somebody that just would let actors play for hours, and I couldn't imagine the stuff he could have pulled off if he would have just had pretty much limitless time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and at the moment, it's the frustrating thing as an actor is that you kind of apply yourself to what you're given and what's on the page, but sometimes with delay or repetition, something completely unexpected happens, and more often than not, the director has cut before that happens. And so, which is why it was great to work with Peter Jackson, because he really didn't. He would let the scene run and run and run, and he'd discover things in the moment. But sometimes time on television, for example, you hear the word cut before you've actually hit the moment where something unexpected happens.
That I would imagine that has to be one of the big challenges of working in television, just the schedule being so tight.
Yeah, and I always kind of go into the project, and one of the things that I say to myself and to the director and to my scene partners is, I'm here because I want to find out what's not on the page, and I also want to surpass my own expectations and everybody else's. And you can only do that when you allow yourself to get the scene that you're given, and then look for something more, or wait for something more sometimes.
And I just want to say one kind of side thing here. I feel bad because normally when I interview somebody, I always make sure that I've seen the specific piece that they're working on twice, just because I want to watch it once as an audience member and just let it wash over me, then once a little bit more critically, and then I try to see other recent things. But you're so fucking busy that I couldn't catch up with all the stuff you've done just in this year.
Thanks. That's all right.
No. And I was, it's something that this has got me back on track to see Pilgrimage, which is something that I have been meaning to check out. And just, you've had a hell of a year, and it's kind of all over the map with Sleepwalker, Pilgrimage, Berlin Station, the TV show, and then the Castlevania series. It's just, I can't pin it down to find the through line to all those things. What is it for you that attracts you to all these different projects?
Just the absolute variety of roles that I am lucky enough to kind of take on. I mean, one of the reasons I loved Pilgrimage so much and jumped on board was just to play a character that speaks a foreign language and lives in a period, which is so far away from modern reality, and yet resonates with a kind of fascination with iconography. I just thought, that's a really interesting idea, and the beginning of this year, I was, on the set of Ocean's 8 playing a really kind of indulgent kind of art curator, and I thought, how do you kind of jump from one to the other? But it's one of the things that is so attractive about what I do, and also kind of frightening sometimes, that you just don't know what's coming next, and you have to really open up your mind and your heart and be like, okay, let's see what the universe throws at me, and be ready to jump on something that is like, I've never done that before, or something really unusual. So that's really what draws me to it. And I've never really been driven by money. So, it can be the lowest budget or sometimes no pay, but if the character is interesting and I've never done it before, I'll let myself go there, because the riches you get from it are not financial, they're artistic.
And you're fortunate that you get to balance both of those, and you can find interesting work on all sides, it seems, because the stuff that you're doing on Hannibal, I mean, that was one of those shows that was just woefully underwatched here in the States. I thought it had clearly a very strong following. The people that watched it were very loyal to it, but my God, that was just they were doing things on there that I couldn't believe they were getting away with, not only from just the sort of the shocking side of it, but from a story perspective, that the stuff they were doing with that was beyond what I expected from that.
Yeah, and a really incredible artistic reach. Bryan Fuller's vision was so extraordinary, and it's a real privilege to go and work with somebody like that, because you have to get in pace with that vision, and it makes you think in a different way. And when you understand that someone is looking at detail in the way that he is, it makes you even more detailed, because you know that it's going to be studied and appreciated and absorbed into the material. But the subject matter was a really, really difficult one, but he made it somehow a kind of extraordinary artistic explosion. And I always said that I shy away from horror, but this was a character that I found fascinating, and the writer found him fascinating as well. So, yeah, that was a real privilege to be part of.
Well, I would honestly say that Sleepwalker, in a lot of ways, it plays a lot like a horror film does, but it just doesn't have the normal sort of the excessive violence or these other sort of things that directors and writers use to shock an audience and to unnerve the audience. But I do feel like there's a design here that's supposed to make the audience very uncomfortable, that's evocative of horror films, the great horror films. And so it's definitely a thriller, but it does have that horror, like a great horror element to it as well. Yeah,
I would say, I mean, it's interesting how, the kind of material that comes forward in different periods of time, like horror is sort of top of the list at the moment, or genre, what do they call it, elevated genre, which is kind of arty horror. I don't know why we have a taste for it at the moment, but we do, and I think a certain level of discomfort in a film auditorium is not something that I shy away from. I recently went to see Don't Look Now, which was playing in my local cinema. I haven't seen it on a big screen before, and I don't know whether you remember that movie with Donald Sutherland and Judy Christie.
Yeah.
But I'd forgotten how horror doesn't necessarily have to be heads being decapitated and flying towards the camera in 3D. And what's in your mind can be far more unsettling than what you actually see. And I hope Sleepwalker kind of just taps into that thing, because we all have a subconscious, so there's nobody left out. Even children, because children dream. They have little dreams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do tap into that, and that's why the film really works for me. And I really do hope anybody that's listening to this will, hopefully have stopped before they got this far into it and just go out and watch the movie, because it's something that's wonderful that I think people should definitely be checking out.
Thank you. That's a great thing to say.
Well, thank you again for taking time out of your evening to do this. I really do appreciate it, and best of luck. I'm looking forward to My Zoe, and that's one of those ones that I can't wait to see. Whenever that comes out, I will be there day one for that, because that's just top of the list for me right now.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Christopher. Really nice to talk to you.
You as well. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your night.